Caffeine. It's in 90% of our daily routines, and the research shows it can sharpen your mind, extend your lifespan, and enhance athletic performance. But it can also trigger anxiety, disrupt sleep, irritate the gut, and in extreme cases, yes, cause real harm.
In talking with people at the FDA years ago, I took chemical composition of caffeine and presented it to an FDA scientist and said, if I wanted to market this molecule and have people consume it on a daily basis, would you approve this drug? And he looked at the chemistry and said, oh, absolutely not. We would not approve this.
So today, we're cutting through the noise with the celebrated and sometimes controversial biochemist Stephen Cherniske. We're looking at both sides, the peer-reviewed benefits and the science-backed risks, and most importantly, how you find your optimal caffeine strategy. Because this isn't about demonizing your morning coffee, it's about using it intelligently. So let's dive in. Now, caffeine is the most studied dietary compound on the planet, and the research is pretty impressive and surprising. A 2022 UK Biobank cohort study published in the European Journal of Preventive Cardiology found that light to moderate coffee consumption, up to 3 cups per day, was associated with a 12% lower risk of all-cause mortality, a 17% lower risk of cardiovascular death, and a 21% lower risk of stroke. So the benefits are real, but here's what most people miss.
In clinical practice, I kept having clients whose main problem was fatigue. I would look at their diet diary and their beverage diary, and I would see that they were consuming pots of coffee, not cups, pots of coffee. So I would say, hey, we're going to have to work on your caffeine intake. And they would say, and I quote over and over again, they would say, well, where am I going to get energy?
And this is the core misunderstanding.
Caffeine does not give you energy, right? It gives you the illusion of energy, but it isn't real energy. No one has a caffeine deficiency. You've got to understand this very basic fact.
Think of it like this. Caffeine doesn't charge your battery. It just hides the low battery warning. And that's not necessarily bad if you understand what's happening. So how does this actually work?
The main thing is how caffeine works. Number one, your brain has this mechanism that tells you when it's time to rest. And that mechanism is the accumulation of a chemical called adenosine. As adenosine accumulates, it binds to adenosine receptors in the brain. And at that point, you're going to get drowsy, and because this is the natural way that your brain resets. After you've been very busy, after you've been awake for a period of time, the adenosine is going to be accumulating and it's going to bind to those receptors, and that means you're going to get drowsy. This is just the way the brain works. What do you know? Caffeine binds to adenosine receptors so that your adenosine stops accumulating. So the natural signal that's going to tell you to rest is circumvented. It's canceled. And so you maintain alertness even though you should be resting.
Now, research in pharmacological reviews confirms this triggers a cascade. Your adrenals release epinephrine and norepinephrine, cortisol rises, and you get that alertness boost. Not inherently good or bad, it's a tool, but tools require proper use. So now let's dive deeper into what particular benefits have been noted in the research. Benefit number 1, cognitive enhancement. Coffee and caffeine intake was associated with lower depression risk, and the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease published research showing that habitual moderate coffee drinkers, around 1 to 2 cups a day, had a lower rate of mild cognitive impairment compared to those who rarely or never consume coffee, suggesting that coffee and caffeine consumption may be linked to reduced risk of cognitive decline that often precedes dementia.
It does have some benefit in terms of alertness, especially in older people. And that alertness, as you pointed out, translates to a better reaction time, better information processing speed, memory, and cognition benefits. So again, but we're talking about people who are over age 50. For example,
in a 2014 randomized controlled trial published in Nature Neuroscience, researchers found that a single dose of 200 milligrams caffeine enhanced long-term memory consolidation in healthy adults, as evidenced by improved performance on a memory discrimination task tested 24 hours later. Benefit number 2, athletic performance.
For anybody exercising for more than, say, an hour or 2, caffeine has a real benefit. So for endurance athletes, caffeine has the effect of improving the utilization of fat as an energy source, so that an endurance athlete will find that they have a better kick at the end of the race if they have some caffeine about an hour or 45 minutes before the race.
Now, the International Society of Sports Nutrition published a position stand confirming that 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram body weight of caffeine, about 200 to 400 milligrams for most people, enhances endurance, strength, and power output.
If that cup of coffee is going to get you off the couch and get you outside for a brisk walk, great, fabulous. Let's don't miss it, because if that's what you need to get off the couch, wonderful.
Benefit number 3, antioxidants and disease prevention.
Number 1, I would put antioxidant benefits, because if you look at the chemistry of coffee, for example, you take the bean and you ferment it, which changes the chemistry, and then you roast it, which changes the chemistry, and then you brew it, which changes the chemistry. So by the time you're finished with this bean, you've created thousands, not hundreds, you've created thousands of discrete molecules, many of which have antioxidant activity.
Now, research in the Journal of Nutrition shows coffee is the primary source of antioxidants in the Western diet, more than fruits and vegetables combined for many people. And those polyphenols fight oxidative stress and inflammation. Benefit number 4, metabolic effects.
Caffeine enhances the secretion of GLP-1 in your gut, which can theoretically help with weight loss.
A 2023 study published in the BMJ Medicine found that higher plasma caffeine concentrations were associated with lower body mass index and total body fat, as well as a reduced risk of type 2 diabetes. Benefit number 5, practical health applications.
And then there's the benefit for men, because caffeine is a diuretic. So there are plenty of men post 65, for example, because men over 65 usually have some enlarged prostate, which is causing a problem with their urine stream. And caffeine, there's millions of men who are managing that with caffeine. And so that is a benefit, because if they didn't have the caffeine, then they would have to use a drug. The most common drug is Flomax, but multiple doses of Flomax are a problem, because you get into the adverse effects of the drug.
So there are well-documented benefits, maybe even life extension and neuroprotection. But now let's talk about what happens when it works against you. And here's where individual biology matters and where the research gets more complex. Risk number 1 is the genetic variable.
I think it's important that we establish right away that there's a genetic factor, which is really important. And that was only discovered 2 years after I wrote the Caffeine Blues. So I wrote Caffeine Blues not knowing this, that 50% of people, roughly 50% of people, are rapid metabolizers. And this has to do with the genetics of your liver. And so because caffeine is a drug, it's a xenobiotic molecule that when it hits your body, your liver says, "Ooh, I got to detoxify this drug." And so some of us, myself included, are rapid metabolizers.
He's talking about the CYP1A2 gene. A landmark study in JAMA found that people with slow variants of this gene who consumed 2 to 3 cups of coffee daily had a 36% increased risk of heart attack, while fast metabolizers had a decreased risk.
Whereas a slow metabolizer, and again, it's about 50-50. So you have half of the population who's slow metabolizers, which means they're going to accumulate caffeine during the day, which means it's going to have an adverse effect on them.
Now, research shows that higher doses of caffeine increase tense arousal, nervousness, and anxiety.
I am someone who runs a little hot. I'm a little anxious. I'm a little type A. And when I started to realize, oh, my caffeine was exacerbating that, it was impacting that.
Risk number 2 is sleep disruption.
To get into deep sleep, which is the slow wave sleep, you can't get there if you haven't detoxified every molecule of caffeine you consume that day. It's really important that people understand that the recovery process is just as important as any activity that you would do during the day. If you don't get into what is called S4 sleep, which is the deepest level of sleep where all the recovery happens, you don't recover much in dream sleep.
A controlled study published in the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine found that a 400 milligram dose of caffeine taken up to 6 hours before bedtime significantly disrupted sleep, reducing total sleep time and altering sleep architecture. Now, many participants did not subjectively notice these changes, underscoring that caffeine can impair sleep quality even when people feel like they're sleeping fine.
People have told me they went off caffeine for 1 week and they found that when they worked out, they weren't sore the day after. Hello?
Because you're recovering.
You were able to recover from the stress of exercise.
Risk number 3 is hormonal cascade.
With that cortisol release, Cortisol is a hormone. Cortisol and blood sugar related. Cortisol is like the basis of your hormones, right? When that gets out of whack, estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, like they can all be negatively impacted.
Now, a controlled study published in Psychosomatic Medicine found that caffeine intake elevates cortisol secretion across the waking hours, with significant increases seen in multiple sampling points throughout the day, including afternoon elevations following repeated doses, indicating that caffeine stimulates the HPA stress axis. So chronic elevation, that can affect your entire endocrine or hormonal system. Risk number 4 is behavioral effects. Now, this one surprised me.
The adverse effects are sometimes not easy to pinpoint because it can be something along the lines of inappropriate, aggressive behavior. You suddenly get angry at your coworker when that's not really who you are, but you just snapped at your coworker. Oh, and then you realize, oh yeah, I had that cup of coffee before I left for the office, and then I had that cup of coffee while I was driving to the office, and dang, I forgot I had that third cup of coffee when I got to the office, and that was probably too much, and it caused me to lash out at my coworker.
That's what I notice is I'm just a little irritable. People can't do things fast enough. I'm mad at my husband. And I think that was your book that I read, that if someone gets in a car wreck and they don't take your caffeine level, but your aggressive mood and your rage could be at least partially induced by caffeine unknowingly.
Risk number 5 is the energy drink danger.
I was hired to do an analysis of injury rates with high school and college athletes. And one of the things that I was looking at was their caffeine content. And so we went into locker rooms with my camera, and I'm taking pictures of the trash cans. And the trash cans in these locker rooms, these high school and college athletes, filled with empty cans of these energy drinks, because these athletes are going out into the field, they're going out into the court primed for what? Injury. Why? Because caffeine in an overdose is an inflammatory effect on the body. So you're putting athletes on the field and putting athletes on the floor, on the court, or wherever they are, that are highly inflamed, and they're involved in ballistic sports, which is putting stress on their tendons, ligaments, and joints. And you wonder why the level of injury is skyrocketing as a direct result of the beverages, and no one is talking about that.
The Pediatrics Journal published a review documenting cardiovascular events, seizures, and even deaths associated with energy drink consumption in adolescents, especially when combined with underlying health conditions. So now let's get to the good stuff. How do you get the benefits while avoiding the risks? Let's talk about the safe dosing framework. Step number 1 is track how much you're consuming.
A cup is 6 ounces. Who drinks 6 ounces of coffee? Nobody.
Europeans.
A mug is 12 ounces. So all of it right there, you already have two cups. And then the travel mugs, some of these travel mugs are so enormous. It's 6 cups of coffee in one travel mug.
For reference, 6-ounce coffee equals about 100 milligrams of caffeine. An 8-ounce coffee mug is about 140 to 200 milligrams. And a large Starbucks at 16 ounces is 300 milligrams of caffeine. And an energy drink can have between 200 and 300 milligrams. Step number 2 is stay within safe limits. According to Stephen, about 100 to 20 milligrams per day is likely safe for most people. 400 to 600 is questionable depending on your genetics. And 600 to 700 plus is dangerous territory. The FDA states that up to 400 milligrams per day is generally safe for most healthy adults. But as Stephen points out, the research into CYP, A2, and other genetic factors shows the guidance reflects broad population data, not personalized physiology, and individuals can metabolize and respond to caffeine quite differently.
It is a powerful drug. And yet there's no guidance at all regarding how much to take and what to watch out for in terms of whether you're overdosing or not. That's the whole issue. That's the entire issue. Everything is dose related.
Step number 3 is consider testing your genetics and dose accordingly. You can do this through Nutrition Genome or 23andMe.
You could have a genetic test, which is readily available to show whether you're a CYP1A1 rapid metabolizer. You could do that, or you could just understand what happens to you when you have caffeine. caffeine later on in the day.
Then, depending on what you find, you can dose according to your genetics. According to Stephen, slow metabolizers can stay at 100 to 200 milligrams max, preferably before noon, and rapid metabolizers can have up to 300 to 400 milligrams spread throughout the day, and that's likely safe. Now, everyone should avoid energy drinks. The dose is too high too fast, and I know this well from personal experience as a former energy drink drinker. But honestly, you don't need a DNA test because Stephen gives us 3 practical tests that allow you to see if caffeine may be an issue for you.
If your pulse went from 65 to 78 beats per minute, you just had an effect, which is probably going to have an adverse effect on your sleep later on that evening.
Now that last one is brilliant. If your resting heart rate jumps 10 or more beats after drinking a cup of coffee, your body is struggling to metabolize it, or meaning you might be a slow metabolizer.
Take your pulse and then you have your coffee, and then 10, 15 minutes later, take your pulse again. And if your pulse is significantly faster, and if you're feeling a little bit like on edge, then you need to understand you're a slow metabolizer.
Step 4 is monitor your sleep architecture. You can use a sleep tracker like Oura, Whoop, even Apple Watch. And if your deep sleep percentage drops, caffeine timing or dose may be an issue.
If you don't get into what is called S4 sleep, which is the deepest level of sleep where all the recovery happens, you don't recover much in dream sleep, right? And that's where caffeine is going to keep you. It's going to keep you in S1, S2. But to get into deep sleep, which is the slow wave sleep, you can't get there if you haven't detoxified every molecule of caffeine you consume that day. A slow metabolizer is going to have caffeine remaining in their bloodstream, stimulating their nervous system for 12 hours.
Caffeine metabolism varies widely between individuals, largely due to the differences in these genetic enzymes that break down caffeine. And research shows that some people metabolize caffeine faster, while others more slowly, meaning that caffeine can remain in the body and exert its effects longer for slow metabolizers than for fast ones. Step number 5 is master strategic timing.
Hormones in the morning, they come up naturally, cortisol, and you might not want to drink coffee on top of that because it could exacerbate that.
If you look at the normal level of cortisol in the morning, it should be rising as you're moving into your day. As you're moving into the alert time of your cycle, it's good to have that little boost of cortisol. Again, you just said something which is pretty profound, which is what if you woke up in the morning and then went for a walk? If instead of going downstairs and having coffee and carbs, if you just went for a walk, you would extend that fat burning activity all the way through until you actually have some starch or some carbohydrate at lunch. So it's really intriguing that caffeine can play a role, but if you delay that a little bit, you get more benefit than if you just slam that cup of coffee.
Research on the cortisol awakening response shows that cortisol levels naturally rise after waking and often peak at about 30 to 45 minutes later. Separate work has shown that caffeine intake stimulates cortisol secretion across the waking hours. Now, with heightened cortisol levels following caffeinated doses. So this suggests that consuming caffeine very early in the morning could add on to the morning cortisol rise. So the optimal timing, wait 90 to 120 minutes after waking to let that natural cortisol work. Cut off caffeine after 12 p.m., especially if you're a slow metabolizer. Don't have any caffeine after 2 to 3 p.m. This even applies to rapid metabolizers. Also note that caffeine is an enhancer, meaning it makes you enjoy whatever you're doing more. So use this to your advantage. If you want to develop a new habit like exercise, walking, hiking, or connecting with a friend. Step number 6, this is my absolute favorite because it allows you to leverage the power of caffeine without becoming overly dependent and adapted. And that is to cycle your intake.
I like to do it where in a power week, I'll do one day on and one day off. And then one day on and one day off. And I usually pair the day on with, I have an interview or I want to do high intensity interval training and I need that extra boost. I feel like it helps. I've also done it where in the week I use it and then I take the weekends off. Or maybe with my cycle, like I use it in the first part of my cycle, the follicular and the ovulatory, and then I cut it off in the luteal.
There's no research because what you're talking about is very intelligent and very individualized. You're not going to find anybody doing any research on large numbers of people who have a specific cycling strategy. But for you, I'm saying that you're brilliant in terms of being aware of how it's affecting you and how it benefits you.
Now, caffeine enhances physical performance, reaction times, but tolerance can develop to some of caffeine's effects. So here are some practical cycling strategies. Now, first is to use coffee one day and not the other. I just drink regular coffee one day and switch to decaf on my days off so I can still get the flavor and ritual. You can also do 5 days on and 2 days off like the weekends. You can also do it for 3 weeks and then go to no caffeine during the luteal phase or right before your menstrual cycle. And sometimes I like to use a strategic timing around important tasks or workouts, like if I have interviews or want to do high intensity interval training. You also might want to take seasonal breaks during January to reset after the holidays. I also like to do this over the summer when I naturally have more energy because I'm out in the sun. Now, step 7 is to test different types of caffeine. Now, not all caffeine works the same. I do very well with cycling regular coffee and decaf, but I've also found unique effects and benefits with tea, herbal, green, and even white, the low caffeine version, and yerba mate on most days, but it's highly individual. You can also vary the temperature of the water to reduce the amount of caffeine that ends up in the drink, or the amount of time you steep the tea, which can also reduce its caffeine content.
Yeah, it's different because tea contains theanine, which blunts the stimulus effect of caffeine. So most people who are sensitive to caffeine can have tea and do quite well. Green tea has some significant polyphenols in it that are beneficial. I'm a green tea, matcha green tea has other benefits which are significant.
And for those who love the flavor of coffee rather than tea, I love decaf, but be sure it's high quality, like our Paleo Valley polyphenol dense decaf.
Where you're going decaf, that's an easy one. You want to have a water process or a Swiss process decaf. You don't want to be drinking a lot of solvents. So a Swiss process or a water process decaf is what you're looking for.
Step number 8, replenish depleted nutrients. Now, I'm big on nutrient deficiency, and nutrient excretion happens with caffeine too. And so I'm always replenishing my sodium, magnesium, calcium, making sure that I'm taking iron in the form of liver capsules whenever I'm taking caffeine. Research has shown that caffeine can deplete calcium, iron, magnesium, and B vitamins. So I love to use our electrolytes 1 to 2 times a day. You can also pair it with your tea and create what I call electro tea. It's sweet, nourishing, and satisfying. A few other tips that I love to mitigate jitters and maximize benefits. You can pair it with L-theanine, which is a calming amino acid in 100 and 200 milligrams, kind of relieves jitteriness, anxiety, and stress. You can also take your caffeine with small amounts of protein or carbs, which blunts the gastrointestinal upset and stabilizes your blood sugar, and avoid high doses on an empty stomach, which can increase the risk of jitters. And a final exercise I highly recommend to anyone is to try 1 week without caffeine.
We could just suggest to anyone watching this to start to look at that and start with going a week without any caffeine at all to see how that affects you. A lot of times people say, oh, I went off caffeine for a week and I slept better than I had been sleeping for decades. Oh my God, I had no idea it was affecting my quality of sleep.
About 8 years ago, a dear friend of mine challenged me to a week without caffeine, and it's the first time I really started to notice how it was affecting me. So try a 1-week elimination test. Track sleep quality, use a tracker if possible, your morning energy levels, your mood, your stability, your heart rate, and you might be amazed by how you feel and what you find. Also, if you're quitting, taper gradually.
A lot of times people say, no, last time I tried to do that, I got a splitting headache. I would then say, okay, let's do this. Taper off caffeine slowly, just like you would taper off any other drug. Taper off the caffeine until such time as you can go for at least 1 whole week without any caffeine. And then let's evaluate your stress level, evaluate your mood, evaluate your sleep quality. And that's very revealing for most people. And what it was will surprise you. The caffeine, which reduces circulation in your brain, right? Caffeine reduces circulation in your brain. And so when you stop consuming caffeine, all of a sudden those blood vessels then dilate. And so the increased circulation in the brain causes the headache.
A 2004 review in Psychopharmacology documents the caffeine withdrawal syndrome, including headache, fatigue, reduced alertness, mood disturbances, and difficulty concentrating, with symptoms typically peaking within 1 to 2 days and lasting up to a week. So here's a great taper protocol. Week 1, reduce by 25%. Week 2, reduce by another 25%. So now you're at half your baseline. Week 3, reduce another 25% of baseline. And week 4, you're at 0 or maintenance low dose. And a final consideration is that if you're tired, you may want to find out what's causing your fatigue or draining your energy also. It could be a lack of sleep, a job you dread, a lack of rest, or trying to do too much, a hard conversation you need to have, lack of boundaries, or too little exercise.
70% of all the energy of your life is created by your muscles. So let's look at your exercise routine and see if we can't create a little more energy there. In every muscle cell, there are these energy factories, because if we're getting down to where energy is really created, which is the mitochondria of your muscles. So let's talk about, is there a way to increase the number of mitochondria in your muscles? And the answer is, yeah, it's called exercise. The strength training increases the number of mitochondria in your muscle cells, and that will generate more energy, and you will require less caffeine. Exercise is the most important part of your routine. I am a nutritional biochemist, and if you asked me which was more important, diet or exercise, I would not hesitate to say it's exercise.
Finally, a quick note on who needs extra caution. Now, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends no caffeine for children under 12 and no more than 100 milligrams for adolescents. Developing brains are far more vulnerable to sleep disruption and anxiety effects, and research suggests caution at all levels during pregnancy. Another population is those who are prone to anxiety or have anxiety disorders.
You have a woman who's a slow metabolizer, who's not drinking like a lot of coffee, but the coffee that she does consume, or the caffeine that she does consume, accumulates in her body and brain and triggers an anxiety attack. And that can manifest as just a general sense of foreboding or of fear or of anxiety. And it can go all the way to an absolute panic attack in which she is out of control from the anxiety and on her way to the ER.
A 2010 review of caffeine and psychiatric disorders found that caffeine can trigger or worsen anxiety symptoms. While specific intake limits aren't established in the research, many clinicians advise people with anxiety or panic disorder to work with their doctor on personalized caffeine recommendations, because sensitivity varies widely across individuals. Cardiovascular conditions. If you have arrhythmias, uncontrolled hypertension, or heart disease, consult your cardiologist about caffeine. Reviews suggest that moderate caffeine intake is not associated with increased risk of arrhythmia or hypertension in general populations, but data are less clear at very high intakes, and individual sensitivity varies, especially with high stimulant products like energy drinks. Now, here's what I love about Steven's approach. The man who wrote Caffeine Blues, who literally had his book tour canceled for criticizing the industry, still drinks coffee.
We were scheduled in the book tour. Warner Books had me scheduled for Good Morning America and 2 other national shows. We had been doing regional shows. 2 weeks before GMA, as they call it, I get a call from Warner's attorney saying that your book tour has been canceled. And I said, what do you mean, GMA dropped out? She says, no, the whole book tour has been canceled. And I said, what's going on? Did I do something wrong? She goes, no, but you said some unkind things about Coca-Cola. And Warner Books is part of the Time Warner Company family of companies. And we have a very close relationship with Coca-Cola. So yeah, no book tour. And I said, how can that be? And she says, oh, Stephen, grow up.
Oh, that's okay.
That's the way the real world works. In regards to my personal use of caffeine, I have found that as I'm now 77, I'll be 78 in a few months. And so I'm consuming a little more caffeine now than I used to. And again, I'm carefully watching my sleep. So again, if I find that 2 cups, 3 cups, sometimes 4 cups, and we're talking about small cups, I'm not talking about mugs, but I'll have sometimes 4 cups of coffee in a day, especially if I'm very active and I've got a couple of deadlines. I'm a very active individual, and so is my wife. And she doesn't use any caffeine, by the way, 0 caffeine. And so she puts up with me and caffeine habit, because it does not make me aggressive. It does not make me irritable. It does not make me anxious in any way. So she's fine with me having 3-4 cups of coffee a day. So I find that as I'm getting older, I am leaning on caffeine a little bit more, which is fine as long as you are monitoring your anxiety level, your heart rate, your blood pressure. My blood pressure on a bad day is 90/60. So
Okay.
again, and I'm a rapid metabolizer on top of that.
At 77, he's dialed in, he knows his genetics, he tracks his biomarkers, and he adjusts as needed.
There is a nuance to it. There is the individualized evaluation of the effect of this drug. And because of that, some people get angry when I say, yeah, I consume caffeine. And they go, you wrote Caffeine Blues. How can you say that? I want the world to be black and white. You're a hypocrite. This is really something that requires exploration and understanding.
And that's the key insight. Caffeine isn't inherently good or bad. The research shows tremendous benefits for cognitive enhancement, athletic performance, and even longevity at moderate doses for most people. It also shows real risks when using correctly or in genetically susceptible individuals that can cause sleep, gut issues, anxiety, panic attacks, and hormonal disruption. So this week I challenge you, track your intake, your sleep timing, and notice how you actually feel. Then dial things in by cycling, changing the timing, the type of caffeine, adding decaf, and getting curious about why you might be tired. I think you're going to be very surprised by what you learn, and let me know what you predict will happen in the comments below. Thanks for listening. Subscribe for more evidence-based deep dives, and remember, the goal isn't to quit caffeine, it's to use it strategically. I'll see you next time.